In 2019, a couple on their honeymoon checked into a remote luxury villa on the edge of an Indonesian rainforest. 3 days later, they were pulled out of that villa with multiple broken bones, no intruder, and no explanation. What happened inside that room is something no one, not even the police, could understand. But the couple swears it wasn't an accident. It was something they couldn't explain. So stick around, because what this couple saw that night is very strange. Back in 2019, a woman named Munira from Saudi Arabia got married, and like a lot of newlyweds, she and her husband decided to go on a honeymoon. But instead of the usual destinations, they chose something a little more exotic, a private villa deep in the forests of Indonesia. Now, this wasn't just any place. This villa was luxury in every sense of the word. We're talking personal staff, a private driver on standby, and a location so remote, the nearest house was over 4 miles away. It sat right on the edge of a dense, protected forest, completely cut off from the outside world. But it felt safe. There were security guards stationed around the property 24/7, and the forest was elevated and fenced off enough to keep wild animals out. For the first 3 days, everything was perfect. Munira and her husband didn't even leave the villa. They stayed in, enjoying the rain, the forest views, and the peace that only a place that remote could offer. It felt like a dream. But on the 4th day, they decided to change things up. They asked the villa staff to leave for the night. They just wanted to be alone. No interruptions, just the two of them in that enormous villa in the middle of a rainforest. By nightfall, a thunderstorm rolled in, the kind with booming thunder and flashes of lightning that lit up the sky. But for Munira, it was beautiful. She loved weather like that. She and her husband were sitting near a large window, sipping coffee, watching the lightning dance through the trees. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. After midnight, they decided to call it a night and headed to the bedroom. Munira fell asleep almost instantly, but sometime later, she had no idea how long. It felt like someone was shaking her. She opened her eyes to see her husband leaning over her, his face pale and full of fear. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Still half asleep, Munira tried to listen. "What sound?" she asked. "It's just the rain." She tried to calm him down, told him it was nothing, and drifted back to sleep. But not long after, she suddenly woke up again. And this time, something was very wrong. She couldn't move. Not her arms. Not her legs. Nothing. She was completely frozen, lying there with her husband right beside her. But she couldn't even call out to him. Her eyes were the only thing she could move, and when she looked over at her husband, her blood ran cold. He was awake, and his expression was horrifying. It was like he'd just seen something he couldn't process, his eyes wide, staring into the distance, but he wasn't speaking. He wasn't moving either. Munira tried to scream, but no sound came out. Panic set in, and that's when she did the only thing she could think of. She started reciting verses from the Quran in her head. She repeated Ayat al-Kursi again and again. And then something even stranger happened. She saw it. A black, ribbon-like shape, almost like a dark band or strip of smoke, was tightly wrapped around her body, like it was holding her down. But the more she recited, the more that black shape began to slowly unwind. Bit by bit, it unraveled, until it finally vanished. As soon as it was gone, Munira could move again. Her voice returned, and she started reciting the verses out loud. The moment she did, her husband snapped out of whatever trance he was in. His body loosened up, and without saying a word, he grabbed her by the hand, pulled her out of the room, and they ran. He called the villa guards on his phone, and within seconds, they were there. After what happened that night, Munira was shaken, but she still tried to rationalize it. She told herself, maybe it was a nightmare. Maybe I imagined it. But then, her husband spoke. After the guards arrived, he finally told her what he saw, and it changed everything. He said that while she was frozen in bed, he saw something absolutely insane. According to him, there were 5 giant creatures inside the room. Creatures that looked like monkeys, but not normal monkeys. These things were huge, and each one had a long black tail that looked exactly like a ribbon. The same black ribbon Munira saw wrapped around her body. He said those tails were coiled tightly around both of them, stopping them from moving. And the monkeys? They weren't just standing around. They were darting from corner to corner at an unnatural speed, almost like they were glitching through space. 1 second they were across the room, and the next they were right beside him. And just as suddenly as they appeared, they vanished. No sound, no trace, just gone. It was almost word for word what Munira had experienced. The guards did a full search of the room. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no open windows, no hidden passageways, nothing. The windows were locked from the inside, and the room was sealed tight. There was absolutely no way a wild animal could have gotten in or out. So what did they see? There was no explanation. The guards were baffled. Munira and her husband were left with more questions than answers. But whatever it wasn't done with them. Because the very next night it came back, and this time it was worse. Munira had fallen asleep again, but was jolted awake. And as soon as her eyes opened, she saw them. The same giant monkey-like creatures back in the room. But now they looked even more terrifying. Their eyes were blood red. They were moving in every direction, faster than ever. She turned to her husband. He was awake, staring at her in pure terror. It was like a twisted replay of the previous night, down to every last detail. Munira started whispering verses from the Quran, trying to keep her focus. But this time, one of the creatures, the biggest one, was standing right on top of her legs. It just stood there, towering over her, glaring at her with rage in its eyes. And then it attacked. Out of nowhere, it began violently beating her legs. Another one went after her husband. They both felt the pain, real, physical pain, but still couldn't move. Munira began sobbing, closing her eyes from the agony, continuing to pray and seek protection. Eventually, just like the night before, the creatures disappeared, vanishing as quickly as they had come. But this time, there was evidence. When she finally broke free and was able to move again, she looked down at the bed and froze. Blood. It was everywhere, soaked into the sheets. This wasn't a dream. Something real had happened. She started screaming, her voice echoing through the villa. Within seconds, several of the female staff rushed into the room, and they were horrified. The sight of Munira and her husband, battered, pale, and visibly shaken, left them speechless. Now here's something important to remember. Munira and her husband had asked the entire staff to leave the villa on the 4th night. But this was now the 5th night. The staff had returned, so there was no confusion about them being alone anymore. And yet, this still happened. The staff immediately tried to help, but for Munira it was already too late. The pain was overwhelming. She collapsed and blacked out. When Munira opened her eyes again, she wasn't in that nightmare of a bedroom anymore. She was lying in a completely different room inside the villa, her husband right beside her. Surrounding them were 2 doctors, 4 police officers, and 3 of the villa's private security guards, and all of them were staring. The looks on their faces said it all. Pure confusion, like they were trying to make sense of something that just shouldn't exist. And then Munira looked down. Both her legs, and her husband's legs, were completely wrapped in medical bandages. She couldn't even move them. The pain was intense. One of the doctors leaned over and quietly told them that he had already ordered a car to rush them to the nearest hospital. Why? Because both of their legs had been fractured in multiple places, and not just that. They'd also been beaten, almost as if some large object or creature had struck them over and over again. And now the police were asking questions, trying to figure out if the villa staff might have been responsible. But Munira and her husband told them everything, every single detail, the creatures, the black ribbons, the beatings. And still, no one had an answer. They were taken to the hospital, where doctors ran a full battery of tests. The results? Multiple clean breaks in their bones, along with deep bruising and gashes that looked exactly like the aftermath of an animal attack. But here's the thing. No animal could have gotten into that room. It was locked. There were no entry points, no forced openings, no logical explanation. They spent 3 days recovering in the hospital before finally flying back home to Saudi Arabia. Once they were back, they filed a formal complaint. But even then, they had no idea what they were actually reporting. There was no criminal, no suspect, no one to blame. Because what do you even say? We were attacked by giant monkeys with black ribbons for tails? And yet, that's what happened. Later, Munira learned something that made her blood run cold. That villa, the one deep in the woods, nearly impossible to get to, was so expensive that barely anyone ever rented it. It would often sit empty for months at a time, completely untouched by human presence. And in that kind of isolation, who or what moves in? There were whispers, local rumors. People said the villa might have been taken over by jinn or something far worse. And then, the final, most disturbing discovery of all. She found out that she and her husband weren't the first ones this happened to. There had been a couple who stayed in that same villa not too long ago, and what happened to them was far more horrific. They were found dead, every bone in their bodies shattered. The wounds were so severe, investigators believed only a massive animal could have done it. But again, no animals had been seen. No tracks, no signs of forced entry, just 2 bodies, broken beyond recognition in a room that should have been safe. Munira believes the only reason they survived is because God showed them mercy. They got out with broken legs. That other couple never left at all. And to this day, no one knows for sure what lives in that villa. Was it a demon? A jinn? Something worse? All Munira knows is this. Whatever it was, it didn't want them there.